The very first inclination I had of Iron Maiden was when I was working at the Sound House, just off the North Circular in London. And Neil Kay had just recorded a demo on a label called the Sound House Tapes. Now, not long after, they were signed to EMI. That was in the December of 1979. And that's when it really started to happen. The first interview I did with Steve and Bruce was, however, with the release of The Number of the Beast. So that was 3 albums on. Now, as you know, Maiden are totally massive. When I look back to the bandwagon days, I think there was only really a handful of British bands that had come up to Maiden status. So, let's get stuck into the very first of the meetings. And this was with Bruce and Steve, as I say. Here's me with a stinking cold, riddled with flu, which can hardly be fair on the boys, but there you go. And we're sharing the tiniest of rooms. So what you find with this first tape is I've just doctored it a little bit, added a little bit of ambience to it. And what do we discuss? Well, we discuss the actual formation of Maiden.
I just sort of formed a band, you know, from some guys that sort of I knew in it, and then I met up with Dave Murray after a few months, and we really hit it off, and sort of carrying the band on from there, really. Been through quite a few line-up changes, but I'm hoping that this is the final line-up, like, you know.
So am I too, because you're heading it really big now.
Yeah.
Heading it especially big, I think, with Killers. That was the big one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Produced by Martin Birch.
Yeah.
How did you get in contact with him? Or did he spot you?
Well, actually, we found out that he would have been interested in doing the first album as well, and which we were really, you know, sort of cheesed off about, because, you know, we wanted him to do the first album, but we thought at that time we weren't a big enough band for him to be interested, because he does all the big bands like Sabbath and Whitesnake and people like that. And then we found out when he did do the second album, he said, oh, I definitely would have done it, you know. So we were sort of kicking ourselves, you know, because we really get on well with him.
In the early days, you're from London. Are you from London, Bruce?
Well, I'm originally actually from Worksop.
You started making a big name for yourself at the bandwagon heavy metal sound house in London.
That's right, yeah.
Now, regretfully, I never saw you down there because I didn't actually join the bandwagon team until a little bit later on.
Yeah.
I was working with Neil Kay then.
Yeah.
He was concentrating on praying mantis then.
That's right, yeah.
And he succeeded in thrashing them to death and making a mess of them because he was so influenced in the American scene. And fortunately, I don't think he got to grips with you on that.
Well, first of all, basically, we just took a tape to him to try and get some work, because we wanted to play a gig at the bandwagon. Cause I've seen a couple of bands down there, and I knew the crowds were really good and everything, so I took the demo into him, and he started sort of plugging it there and then, and he got to the top of the heavy metal charts, like, you know, which had printing sounds and all that sort of thing, and you know, went from there. Like, we did a few gigs here, built up a following, and fans were going pretty crazy, like, you know.
It was a great place though, wasn't it? You know, a good fun place.
I was really sorry to see it go down. I mean, he's got another place now called the Headstone, but it's not really quite the same.
I've always been into the aggressive, up-tempo British steaming side of rock music, right? The sort of the Deep Purple end of things, you know, stemming from like the Gillan days back in rock, because I mean in rock was my favourite, probably still is my favourite all-time heavy rock album.
Yeah.
And so I've always wanted to get sort of under the skin of that sort of sound, because it's just something I feel sort of inside me, and it just wants to get out all the time. And I was always trying to pull Samson, if you like, in that direction. And there's bits of it appear all over the place in earlier stuff like Head On and things like that. And when Tony Platt came along, the producer who used to work with AC/DC and all that sort of stuff, his production ideas and things like that really fitted in very well. Now, Paul's always been more of a boogie, more of a blues guitarist at heart, if you really get down to it. And Shock Tactics was, if you like, it was a bit of papering over a few cracks. You know, I mean, I love the album. I think it's, apart from this Maiden album I've done, I think it's the best thing I've ever done. I mean, but as I say, I think the Maiden thing we've got out now is, vocally, as far as I'm concerned, I'm more pleased with it. But even so, we did in fact write a new album after Shock Tactics, all the material and everything.
What's happening to that?
Well, that should hopefully be coming out with their new singer, Nicky Moore. But the material is a lot more bluesy, a lot more down tempo and things like that.
Sort of Whitesnake type stuff?
Much more that type of sound.
Good.
Yeah,
Yeah, that sounds good.
but it, you know, I mean, I could just see that things were going to go more and more in that direction, and one or two of us were going to get more and more happy. And then Steve came up and asked, would you be interested in joining after Reading Festival?
So, you knew Steve before then?
Oh,
Must
yeah.
have done.
Oh, yeah.
We know each other about
A couple of years.
Yeah.
I mean, Samson and Maiden. I mean, I joined Samson when Maiden and the whole thing was just starting to like break in the press, and so we ended up doing 4 or 5 shows together in London and around. And so, we got to know the band vaguely, and then of course they were up and away and off around the world, so we didn't see them for about a year. In the meantime, we were stuck in good old Blighty, in the Rexford Porthouse, and etc. And eventually, we sort of used to meet up in strange and unusual places. Of course, Clive used to be with Samson as well.
I was going to... Clive Burr, is that? Yeah.
Clive used to be with Samson.
Many moons ago.
Many moons ago, but... So there's... Clive still knows Paul really well.
Yeah.
In fact, I think we're thinking of appointing Paul official recruiting agent, I think, at this rate.
Well,
No, we're all still really, really good mates. I mean,
that's good.
So there's no animosity going down at all. And incidentally, I think Nicky Moore, the new singer with Samson, is a really excellent singer. He used to be with a band called Tiger and Hackensack and that lot. Really excellent blues singer.
Without taking things out of context too much, do you think they're going to do anything now? Because they've lost that Thundersticks.
You see, Thunderstick was one of these people who was very, very into the American side of things. Very into this sort of
like Kiss.
the Kiss was his favourite band, and the Tubes. I mean, originally he didn't wear a mask; he just painted his face up. And we said, look, it really does look a little bit too much like Kiss. I mean, it's pretty obvious. So he took to wearing the mask. And at first it was kind of, I suppose it was a reasonable gimmick, at first, and nobody really took too much notice of it. It was like a bit of a strange thing. We all just assumed it was part of the stage show. But then it became an actual stage persona, sort of like an Eddie type thing. And the main problem was that basically people couldn't really handle it. I mean, it got to the stage where everybody was throwing wobblers about this, that and the other, and he mustn't be seen going into a gig without his mask on, and he couldn't sign autograph. And at that point I just shut down.
Martin Birch has produced the last 2 albums.
Amazing guy. I mean, I've always wanted to work with him because he's done obviously the last Sabbath albums, the last Rainbow albums. Well, I think the best Rainbow albums anyway. And
White Snake was done, and
White Snake, Cult. I mean, and of course Deep Purple, which is like, everybody knows about that. And I've always wanted to work with him because he's worked with all my favourite singers as well. And I was just so surprised when we worked with the guy how relaxed he was, and how much he didn't try to put his own views over and impose himself on musicians. I mean, so many producers you get try and impose themselves and impose their ideas of what you ought to sound like, whereas he imposes your idea of what you want you to sound like, but he sees it a lot clearer than you do, because he's in the control room and he's worked with heavy rock and he knows how people think. He'll come up with an idea which you think, oh, that's the sort of idea I would have thought of, but I wouldn't have thought of it that clearly, or I wouldn't have put it there. And of course it sounds just like what you always wanted. So yeah, I think he's superb. He also makes you work really hard.
Yeah, now what do you do? This is very interesting because I get so many letters about this type of thing. You go into the studio, what, afternoon is it, but mainly? You go to the studio, right?
Yeah,
you all going together?
It started getting to the point where we was going in about 4 or 5 o'clock and then working right through to 4 and 5 in the morning.
Yeah, that's good, yeah. Night owl like me, yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But he just brings the best out of you, basically.
No, so what do you do? No. Do you all go in together? Do you all sort of pile in?
Yeah,
you've got your songs pre-written and you've got your arrangements pre-written?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Right.
And then we go in there and Martin will get, say, the drum sound first and then the bass, the guitar and the guitar sounds and all that, to, whatever. And
are they in separate booths?
The drums were in a separate room completely.
Yeah.
And my bass gear was in a separate room. and the two guitars were sort of in a room together, but screened off.
It's all top secret, of course.
Yeah.
Martin
Oh
Birch
yeah,
Roberts
they give
for
away
this, yeah.
secrets. Yeah.
No, he will.
But yeah, anyway, that don't always do it that way, but you get a really sort of good ambient sound when you put the drums in a separate room and that sort of live type of sound. And then you just record it, the backing tracks, usually with the bass drums and rhythm guitars.
I usually sing just a guide vocal, which is a vocal that isn't actually put down. Well, it's put down on tape, but it's not. We don't use it in a final thing. I redo the vocals later on, but it's basically just to give that live feel for everybody, so that it feels like we're a band and it feels like we're playing live. And everything goes down live.
It's just so that you can have some vocals come through in your cans, and it's like I said, gives you a live feel, so you can imagine you're doing a gig or whatever, and really sort of get stuck into it. Because otherwise, sometimes I don't know. It depends. Some tracks work better without vocals, some better work with them. But generally, we like to have a guide vocal because it just gives you a better feel to it.
Do you do a lot of overdubs on top of the tape when you're finished, or is it all depending on Martin? Does Martin sort of determine that?
Usually what we do is, for example, say the rhythm guitars, just to get, say, a rhythm guitar sound that sounds more live, sounds more like the sound you hear in a concert hall, we might put another rhythm guitar, very closely tracked, on top of the one we've got to thicken it out, because then, that's the sound that you hear at the back of a concert hall is the sound coming off the stage and the sound coming off the back wall. So you get a natural delay there, which you can't reproduce in the studio, unless you put one guitar on top of another.
I like that.
It's that though. I think the Americans tend to sometimes overdo it with the technicalities.
They
put too many
overdubs.
and they put too many vocals, and it's like they're really good bands. They can all really play and all that, but they tend to lose, the sort of real aggression and everything. Which we try very hard to keep. That's why we do more or less record live. The whole sort of drums, bass, and rhythm guitars are played together and everything. And it's not like a sort of manufactured sound. It's like a really live. We try and get as live sound as possible.
What I hate about American bands is that they so often are the victim to just producing soulless, turgid sort of. It rock and roll. That just about sums it up. It's not heavy rock. It's not like, ugh. It's like rock and roll. It's all horrible and soapy and sleepy and laid back.
A bit like their food.
Yeah, revolting.
All in plastic packets.
There are some bands that really do give it some stick. Van Halen, I think, are really good.
I tell you,
they really
against
get
the
stuck
Rods.
in.
You'd seen them.
Yeah, they are. As it happens, yeah.
I tell you, they are the best American three-piece I've seen from. I was totally amazed when they did the first night.
Yeah.
Because they were giving it all that down the front, running about the stage.
Far
like English
live
players,
than on the
great.
album, I think.
Are they?
Couldn't believe it. Superb
really
guys
giving
as
it
well.
some stick.
But really good band.
I think they're a lot better live than on record, because I must admit when I heard the record, I thought it was good, but it sounded very, very American.